All right, today we're going to dive into one of history's greatest mysteries, the Bronze Age collapse. We're talking about a time around 1200 BCE when this whole interconnected world of massive empires and incredible cities just vanished. It's an event that completely reset the course of human history. And, figuring out how it all happened might just teach us something important about our own world.
So try to put yourself in their shoes for a second. Imagine living in this vibrant world. You've got these huge, powerful empires, bustling cities, trade routes stretching for miles. And then, within your lifetime, you watch it all just disappear. And we're not just talking about one kingdom falling. No, this was the whole system, the entire international network, completely breaking down pretty much all at the same time.
So that brings us to our first section, a world erased. We're going to look at how this incredibly connected world fell apart, seemingly in the blink of an eye. To really get a handle on just how big this loss was, we first have to understand what that world was actually like. Because the late Bronze Age, it was an incredibly advanced and interconnected time. And the fact that it vanished so quickly is just, well, it's shocking.
So what are we actually talking about here? Well, the formal name for this event is the Bronze Age collapse, and it all went down in a really short window of time, basically between 1200 and 1150 BCE. And it wasn't a small local thing. It devastated this huge area, all the way from Greece, across the Eastern Mediterranean, and deep into the Near East.
And the list of major powers that were affected is just staggering. You've got the Mycenaean kingdoms in Greece. These are the guys from the Trojan War legends. Then there's the Hittite Empire in what's now Turkey, a true superpower. You have wealthy coastal cities like Ugarit. Even the Kassite dynasty in Babylon felt it. And then there's Egypt, the new kingdom, which you'd think was invincible. They managed to survive, but just barely, and they were never really the same again.
The archaeology tells a really grim story. When researchers dig up these ancient cities, they find these thick layers of ash and destruction, one after another. The trade routes that were the lifeblood of this world, they just vanished. But maybe the most shocking part of all is what happened in Greece. The ability to write, this incredibly complex skill, was completely lost. For 400 years. That's what we call a real dark age. Okay, on to our next section, the Great Unraveling. This is all about the domino effect that rippled across their entire world. Because you have to ask, right? How did all of this happen so fast and across such a huge area? Well, the answer isn't some single simple event. It's more like a catastrophic unraveling of the whole system.
So if you look at the timeline, you can actually see how it all cascaded. It seems to have started around 1200 BCE with a major famine hitting the Hittite Empire. That's the first crack. Not long after that, their capital city, Hattusa, is just abandoned. Then the chaos spreads. Around 1177 BCE, you start seeing coastal cities burning, and this is when Egypt has its famous battles against these mysterious invaders they called the Sea Peoples. And then finally, by about 1150 BCE, the great Mycenaean palaces back in Greece are violently destroyed. It's like each disaster just set off the next one down the line.
And this really gets to the heart of the system's hidden weakness. See, the all-important material back then was bronze. It's in the name, right? Bronze Age. But to make bronze, you need two things, copper and tin. And these metals often came from totally different, far-off places. So, step 1, the trade routes snap. The shipments of copper and tin just stop coming. Step 2, bronze production grinds to a halt. You can't make what you don't have. Then, step 3, the armies get weaker. No new bronze means no new weapons, no new armor. And that leads to the final step, defenses fail. Suddenly, your cities are incredibly vulnerable both to outside attack and to unrest from within. It was a total system failure.
Which brings us to our next big question in a new section. A storm of causes. Because there wasn't a single reason for the collapse. So we've seen how the system fell apart, right? That whole domino effect. But that just begs a bigger question. What caused those first dominoes to fall? And what all the evidence points to is that there wasn't one single thing. It was more like a perfect storm of different crises all hitting at the same time.
So really, what was it? What truly caused the collapse? For a long time, historians would look for that one single answer, that one smoking gun. But the way we think about it now has really changed. The consensus today is that there wasn't just one cause. It was a whole bunch of devastating things all coming together at once.
So let's break down the ingredients of this perfect storm. First up, you've got climate change. We have scientific evidence now that points to a really severe, long-lasting drought that would have caused massive famine. Then there's that system fragility we just talked about, how everything was so interconnected that one failure could bring down the whole thing. On top of that, you have mass migrations. These sea peoples we mentioned, they weren't just an invading army. They were more likely huge groups of displaced people, refugees, basically, fleeing their own problems. And this whole region is known for earthquakes. A series of major quakes could have easily taken out key cities and infrastructure. And finally, you put all that together and you get social breakdown. People just lose faith in the system that's supposed to protect and feed them, and they might have just walked away.
And this is really the key takeaway here. Any one of these things on its own, probably survivable. I mean, these civilizations had dealt with droughts before. They'd handled earthquakes. They'd fought off invaders. But the problem was they didn't get just one. They got all of them, all at once. And that cumulative pressure, it was just too much. It was fatal.
All right, let's move on to our next section, echoes in our time, because this really is a warning from history. Now, you might be thinking, okay, that's interesting, but it was 3,000 years ago. What does it have to do with us? Well, as it turns out, the echoes from that collapse are surprisingly loud today. I mean, just look at the parallels between their world and ours. They had a highly specialized, interconnected world. So do we. Their entire economy was built on sea trade, moving essential resources like tin and copper around. Our global economy depends on exactly the same thing, just for resources like oil and microchips. That kind of interdependence makes things really efficient for sure, but as they learn the hard way, it also makes you incredibly vulnerable. And that's a lesson that is definitely worth remembering. But, you know, the story doesn't just end in darkness and ruin. It's a bit more complicated than that, because while a collapse like this is incredibly destructive, it also, in a way, clears the ground for new things to grow. From the ashes of those old, rigid empires, new, smaller, more flexible societies started to emerge. And maybe most important of all, a much simpler way of writing came about. The alphabet, the direct ancestor of the one we use today. It made reading and writing accessible to way more people. So, that brings us to our final takeaway. What can we really learn from a world that just vanished more than 3,000 years ago? I think the most humbling lesson of all is that civilization isn't some permanent fixture. It's actually a pretty fragile achievement. You have to believe that the people living back then thought their world, their civilization, was eternal, right up until the day it wasn't. And their story serves as this powerful reminder for us to think about the vulnerabilities in our own complex, interconnected world. It really leaves you with a pretty big question, doesn't it? Just how resilient are we?